Hi, guys. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm recapping an interesting manhwa that I know you'll like. It's called Escape the Original Male Lead. Now, let's get started. The story begins with a warm and bright sunlight blending onto two characters. A young man with blonde hair and a beautiful girl with rose-red hair. They're having a tea and cookies party. The red-haired girl, named Elena Lespel, is relaxing while sipping her tea, while the handsome young man nervously watches her. At 14, Elena is already stunning and bound to become even more beautiful as an adult, which makes the boy happy. He asks how long she intends to make him wait because he's eager to hear her answer. Elena hears his question but hesitates slightly, putting her tea down. The young man interprets her hesitation as shyness, finding it adorable. However, his delight turns to shock when Elena declines. Panic sets in as he realizes she's rejecting him, despite his position as the heir to his family's duchy. He asks for the real reason, and Elena straightforwardly replies that he simply doesn't appeal to her. In fact, she admits to preferring his younger brother, which surprises him even more. Elena confirms it again, aware of his tendency to cheat on his fiancée as he did in the novel. She wonders how he could propose to her with such confidence. This young man, named Killian, faces Elena's rejection, as she does her best to stay firm, aware of the story's plot and choosing a fitting response to his proposal. 1 year ago, Sai was riding in a carriage, and as soon as she stepped out, she was surprisingly amazed by what she saw. A male butler, who served the Halo's family, appeared and greeted Miss Lespel. Miss Lespel couldn't take her eyes off the wide, magnificent mansion and the luxurious fountain decorating the grounds. As they walked, two maids appeared and greeted Miss Lespel. One of them, with white hair, introduced herself as the head maid of the estate, while the maid beside her, named Rosie, explained that she would be helping Miss Lespel from now on. They exchanged greetings, and Rosie attempted to take Miss Lespel's bag to assist her. The butler then informed Miss Lespel of the time for her visit with Grace. In the maids' quarters, seated at a long table, the other maids were surprised by how closely Miss Lespel resembled Sir Kane. They felt happy for her but also sad, knowing she was living alone at such a young age. A maid with dark purple hair, while eating bread, remarked that Miss Lespel was lucky to have her future secured now that the master was taking her in. Another maid overheard this comment and became instantly angry, thinking it was insensitive to speak that way when Miss Lespel had just lost her father. This can't be helped, as each maid has her own opinion, but it's truly sad for Miss Lespel. Thank goodness she has a bright future ahead of her. Well, I still don't know about that. But let's hope she will live happily and comfortably in her new life. On the way, the little girl looked at the large number of decorations throughout the castle and noted that while you were cleaning it all up, there wouldn't be a second left to rest a little earlier. Illa heard screams in the street. A little girl begged her mother not to send her there because she didn't want to be a servant. The woman cried and asked for forgiveness as she could do nothing because of her father's debts. The same thing was said about her. Apparently, her father was a knight who owed a lot of money, and since the debtor himself had died, they would have to give her to the daughter. What a pity. So small and without parents. After some time, they reached the Duke's office, and the butler said that she could go in. Our heroine wondered if she would really work there now. She couldn't make mistakes there. There was a young man sitting in the room who told her to come closer. She thought to herself that she felt a serious force, probably because he was a duke, but still, she couldn't give in to it. Then she approached his table, bowed, and greeted him, calling him master. The guy asked in surprise which owner. It seemed there was a misunderstanding. Rel began to get nervous and really hoped that he wouldn't tell her to pay off her father's debt immediately. Where did she get that kind of money from? But the man said that she had not come to the castle as a servant, so there was no need to call him that way. The young man invited her here to look after the baby. When the girl asked in surprise why, the Duke replied that he had a debt to her father. Eleanor exclaimed that it was not her dad who owed him but, on the contrary, perhaps he was once rich, but she simply didn't know about it. The man interrupted her and replied that he owed him more than money, so she could now call him Lord Duke and consider this place her home. Our heroine looked at him in shock and couldn't believe what she had just heard. After this, the maid led her into the room, and Elena asked if this would really be her bedroom now. The girl answered that, yes, she should come in quickly. When the maid froze and didn't take her eyes off her, Rel asked why she was looking at her like that. Rosie answered, because the lady is very pretty, but there's no time for that. It's necessary to choose beautiful clothes for her. Then she grabbed the little girl, who didn't understand anything, by the hand and dragged her along with her into the dressing room. After some time, after trying on different dresses, an outfit was finally chosen that suited her perfectly. The maid silently admired that she was simply dazzling and was definitely CS' daughter. You just couldn't take your eyes off her, perhaps because she looked so much like him. When the girl said that she felt very awkward, the girl exclaimed that she shouldn't talk nonsense because she had become even more beautiful. After which, she asked if she would like to see the castle and drink tea in the garden since she had dressed up. Elena answered that it was fine. After a while, when she saw various cakes, the little one exclaimed that it was the first time she had seen something so appetizing. The maid was very glad that she liked them and enjoyed their taste. Suddenly, our heroine saw two boys heading towards her and wondered who they were. Rel couldn't help but notice that they were both very handsome. When Rosie whispered in her ear that these were young gentlemen, it dawned on the little girl that these were the Duke's sons. The older one greeted her and stated that this meant that she was Kane's daughter. The little one was so confused that she just stood there and silently looked at him. Then she realized that she was staring at his face and didn't even say hello. After which, she bowed and said, "My name is Elena Rel. It's very nice to meet you." The boy introduced himself as Killian, and this was his younger brother, Lucien. Our heroine noted to herself that he was very cute since he got embarrassed and blushed. Suddenly, the elder said that he heard that she had no plans for today. How about chatting with him alone for a little while? He liked her. That night, our heroine tossed and turned in bed as she was dreaming about a past life. At that time, the girl was an ordinary office plankton who was drowning in a pile of work every day. She lived in an atmosphere of terrible competition. That's why she always wanted to take at least a little break from this routine. The only joy in her past life was the fantasy romance novels she read on her way to work. Suddenly, the bus braked sharply, and the girl's phone slipped out of her hands. The young man decided to help her lift it and accidentally saw what was written there. There was a part of the story plus about the close relationship between the main characters. It was a fantasy romance for adults about regrets called No Regrets, Elena. In this work, Elena was the villain and the lover of the main character. When the girl got pregnant, she screamed that it was Killian's child and that he shouldn't leave, but the guy did it anyway. After such a dream, our heroine suddenly woke up in a cold sweat. It just can't be that he left her even though she was pregnant. Now that the terrible night has changed into a bright morning, the maids are busy with their tasks, cleaning the garden and preparing the boss's food. Rosie, feeling delighted, opens the window and asks Elena if she had a good sleep. Elena simply sighs as she gazes at her sweet dessert and tea, leaving Rosie puzzled about why she's sighing on such a bright and warm morning. Rosie steps forward and calls Elena's name several times, but Elena, lost in thought, doesn't respond. Left with no choice, Rosie raises her voice, startling Elena. She looks exhausted, and Rosie notices this, immediately becoming concerned. To avoid further worry, Elena quickly makes an excuse, saying it's her first time sleeping in such a warm, comfortable bed. However, Rosie isn't convinced and slams the table, insisting on knowing the real reason for Elena's unusual mood. Elena, surprised and nervous, is taken aback by Rosie's persistence. But as she watches Elena, Rosie softens, finding her expression so adorable that she decides to accept her excuse, recalling that she had a similar experience once. In Rose's mind, she can't help but admire the grace, charisma, and potential of the noble family she serves. She thinks about how the beautiful children of the household brim with promise, and she has often lost sleep with her heart racing over such a remarkable family. Elena notices Rose's admiration and smiles, feeling it's nice to know someone else fangirls over looks just like she does. As for Elena, she tries to push away her strange dreams from the night before. Suddenly, she asks Rosie about Lord Killian, wondering if he's already engaged. Rosie confirms it, causing Elena to break into a slight sweat, thinking it would be odd if he didn't have a fiancé as the heir of such an important family. She gathers her thoughts and decides to ask another question from her dream, inquiring if Lord Killian's fiancée might be Count Oswald's daughter. Rosie confirms this too, which jolts Elena, realizing her dream wasn't just a silly fantasy. Until yesterday, Elena hadn't even known the Oswalds existed, let alone that they were a noble family. As a commoner, she rarely thought about the nobility. Their world seemed far removed from hers. After all, why would a commoner care about noble families and their ranks? Yet somehow, Elena has a vivid image of what the Oswald estate looks like, as if she's visited it before. It isn't entirely surprising to her, though, because, in her mind, Jane Oswald has always been the heroine of her life. After some time, Elena was sitting near a flower bed, telling fortunes with a flower by tearing off its petals one by one and asking if the young man was a scoundrel, yes or no. Suddenly, she heard sounds coming from very close by. Approaching the source, she saw knights training. She thought her father had probably trained there in his time, and watching the strong young men made her feel that it was like a sanctuary, a place where pilgrimages should be made. When some of the boys noticed her, Elena thought she shouldn't be a bother and decided they would see each other later. On her way back, she noticed a walking path, the kind she expected from a wealthy family's estate. Walking along it, she felt refreshed, as if she were born again. Suddenly, a desperate cry rang out, and she started running toward the sound, concerned that someone might be hurt. Reaching the spot, she saw Killian standing next to his younger brother, Lection. Elena had read that the main reason Lection became a duke was because of Killian, who bullied him constantly, eventually pushing him aside to gain the title. Killian was now threatening Lection, telling him not to even think about screaming. Elena couldn't stand it. She rushed over, placing herself between them and saying that behavior like this shouldn't be tolerated. Killian's expression immediately softened, and he asked, surprised, what Elena was doing there. He jokingly asked if she had come all the way to the training center just to see him. His question irritated Elena, who wondered how he could say such a thing in that situation. Killian laughed and remarked on her boldness. Lection, however, grew angrier and even more hurt by his older brother's dismissive attitude. Killian treated him as if he weren't even a person. Killian suggested that he and Elena go for a walk together since they had already met, but Elena refused, telling him to go on his own. She then turned to Lection and asked if he was okay. When she tried to reach out to him, he quickly pulled away, clearly scared of his older brother. Undeterred, Elena offered to walk him home. She gently placed him on her back, ignoring Killian's protests. As they walked, Lection revealed that Killian, the Duke's heir, often treated him with cruelty, tarnishing their noble family's name. Killian looked so bewildered that he didn't even know how to respond. Elena reassured Lection, telling him to be patient and that they would soon be home. She thought to herself that Killian was beyond redemption, a real piece of trash, someone she could never see herself with. She wouldn't allow Lection to continue being bullied by his brother. When they reached the estate, the maids were shocked by Lection's condition. Furious, Elena couldn't understand why Killian would treat a child so cruelly. The head maid, Sophie, checked Lection and thankfully confirmed he had no serious injuries. Sophie, who had cared for Lection since he was a baby, thanked Elena for saving him. Elena was puzzled. Did Sophie know about Killian's bullying? She asked if Sophie had been aware of everything all along. Sophie explained that the bullying had started about 6 months ago, right after their father left for war. Young Master Killian, as the heir, had naturally stepped up, but soon abrasions and bruises began appearing on Lection's body. Lection even had nightmares, pleading with his brother to stop. Sophie had never imagined that the young master could act this way, and others in the household had also begun to notice. But no one dared to speak up, as Killian was the Duke's legitimate heir, while they were merely commoners. Elena thought to herself that Killian's behavior had been flawed since childhood. She realized she couldn't change the course of history on her own, but she was determined to try. Just then, a butterfly appeared, and she was startled to see it fly into her room later. Standing on the balcony, she resolved to change the future, no matter what it took. After some time, Lekshan regained consciousness. A servant rushed to his side, relieved that he had woken up, and gave him something to drink. When Lekshan asked how he ended up in his room, the maid told him that it was Mrs. Elena who had brought him. Lekshan remembered how he had told himself not to cry, as the members of the Hyo's family were supposed to be strong. That evening, while Elena was out for a walk, she heard Killian's voice calling her name. Startled, she quickly hid and peeked out from behind some bushes. Killian called out, asking if she was playing hide-and-seek with him. His persistence baffled her. He seemed to follow her everywhere, always asking her to go for a walk with him under various pretexts. His clinginess had begun to wear on her, and she wondered if he seriously thought he could win her over, even after she had witnessed him bullying his own brother. As she continued to watch him calling her name, she realized he was unbelievably clingy. Suddenly, Elena heard a noise coming from the bushes. She slowly crawled to the ground and finally found an adorable brown rabbit. However, she noticed that the rabbit looked distressed, with a pained expression, as if it wasn't feeling well. Unsure of what to do, Elena wondered if she needed to call a veterinarian. Nervously, she reached out and gently touched the rabbit. The moment her finger tapped its body, the rabbit began to glow, and a small gust of wind swirled around them. The rabbit's eyes opened instantly, and to Elena's surprise, it spoke, calling her master. Elena was shocked to hear the rabbit talking, but the brown rabbit seemed delighted, grateful that she had saved its life. She asked, just to confirm, if it really had spoken, and the rabbit smiled, explaining that he had been worried he might pass out because he was feeling unusually weak that day. Luckily, Elena had arrived just in time to save him. This surprising and strange moment made Elena laugh with joy. Gently patting the rabbit, she asked for his name. The rabbit introduced himself as Lanny. When Elena asked what he was, he seemed confused, replying, "I'm Lanny." This answer made Elena laugh again, and she explained that she hadn't meant his name. Realizing her question, Lanny clarified that he was an earth spirit, proudly adding that he had been feeling weak lately but now felt much better, thanks to Elena's power flowing into him. Lanny's explanation left Elena surprised, and she blushed slightly with happiness. She thought back to the novel. She didn't remember anything about Elena having powers or a connection to spirits. Elena had only ever been described as a love interest in the story. Noticing that Elena seemed deep in thought, Lanny asked if something was bothering her. Elena replied that everything was fine but wondered why he called her his mistress. The rabbit explained that he simply recognized her as his new owner. Elena accepted this, saying, "All right, if you say so, then that's how it is," and hugged him, exclaiming about how soft he was. Hearing approaching footsteps, Elena thought that Killian had found her, but it turned out to be Leon's youngest son walking towards her. She sighed in relief, realizing it wasn't Killian. She asked the boy how he was feeling, and he, thinking that she was still concerned about him, thanked her and assured her he was fine. Elena smiled, saying she was glad to hear it. The young boy, Lekshan, tried to collect his thoughts and calm his nerves, then asked what she was doing in this place. Elena explained that she was there because she had found this little cutie, pointing to Lanny. Lekshan looked around, confused, seeing nothing. Thinking she might be referring to the flowers nearby, he didn't understand when she stretched out her hands and asked if he wanted to touch it. He was puzzled, thinking she might want him to touch her hands, and tentatively reached out. Elena herself began to feel confused as he touched her hands. Lanny then explained that no one else could see or pet him. Elena looked at him in amazement, realizing that only she could see him. Lekshan, now feeling awkward, quickly pulled his hand back. She asked if he saw the rabbit, but he looked around and said there was no one else nearby. Elena replied that it was true, and Lanny, as if to confirm, exclaimed that, of course, only she could see him. Suddenly, Elena grabbed Lekshan's hand and tried to make him stroke the rabbit, though it only ended up being her own palm. The young boy was thoroughly confused, not understanding why she was acting this way. Just then, Killian's voice rang out, calling for her and saying it was enough of this hide-and-seek game. Elena, feeling exhausted from Killian's persistence, wondered why he was so clingy. She hugged Lekshan to calm him and whispered for him to stay quiet. Then, She muttered that he was probably hungry and suggested they go eat together, wanting to have dinner with him. Later, the butler expressed surprise, commenting that the young gentleman hadn't expected Lection to suggest having dinner together. While preparing, the Duke, who had just returned, asked if there was any strange smell about him, perhaps from his travels. The young man sniffed the Duke cautiously and assured him there was no smell, apart from the faint scent of ink. The Duke chuckled, recalling how stunned his youngest son had been by his appearance when he returned from war, so much so that he had simply run away. The butler explained that the Duke had returned from a journey and was still wearing traces of blood from the battlefield. He hadn't expected Lection to be so sensitive, but it was understandable, given his young age. Turning his attention to the eldest son, the Duke asked how he had been handling his responsibilities. The assistant responded that, while the elder had been at a loss at first, he soon adjusted and was now managing so well that they hardly noticed his absence. The Duke nodded, noting that, as the heir, his son must conduct himself appropriately. After some time, the table was set, and it was time to begin the meal. The eldest son kept staring at our heroine and winking at her, but the girl tried to ignore him, avoiding looking in his direction. Suddenly, the Duke asked her if she liked the food, and she answered that she did. Killian quickly noted that she was eating as little as most other ladies, saying, "Illa is already charming, but it seems she wants to become even more beautiful." Determined to show her appetite, Elena started eating heartily. The eldest son remarked that it was good to see she had a great appetite, adding that he didn't like when people exhaust themselves to become slimmer. Then, he held out a forkful of meat towards her, urging her to eat it, but Elena politely declined, saying she was already full. She thought to herself, "Why is he offering me his leftovers? Does he really think I'll eat scraps?" Killian looked at her, trying to maintain an indifferent expression. Elena shifted her attention to Lection, noting to herself that she thought he might feel uncomfortable dining next to his brother. However, he seemed to be enjoying his meal, though he was pushing his vegetables aside. She decided to say something, mentioning that he'd only grow strong if he ate his vegetables. The Duke immediately commented that his youngest son didn't like vegetables in any form. Elena thought to herself that it's rare for a child to like vegetables, but then Lection, grimacing, speared a piece of broccoli with his fork and began to chew it reluctantly. The Duke observed this in surprise, noting that Lection wouldn't eat vegetables even when his father and mother asked him to. "But it seems he listens well to Elena," the Duke added, and then said that perhaps they should have been dining together more often. Our heroine was taken aback, not understanding what he meant. Seeing the question in her eyes, the Duke explained that with the arrival of spring, both Killian and Lection would be heading to the academy in just 3 months. In their kingdom, winter is short and comes a bit early, and all children of a certain age are enrolled in the capital's academy. There, they study swordsmanship, martial arts, history, economics, politics, and art. There are many fields of study, but one area that isn't taught there. Perhaps Elena Rell could have been a powerful sorceress, changing the course of history, had she not fallen in love with Killian, he mused. The Duke then asked if Elena would also like to enroll in the academy. She thought to herself that there was nothing there she particularly wanted to learn, so she replied that she needed time to think it over. The Duke reassured her that it was fine and understandable, as it might have come as a surprise. He added that it wouldn't be too late to consider it, even after Jane arrived. Elena wondered to herself if Jane would really come and if things would go according to the original plot. The Duke went on, mentioning that Oswald, who is Killian's fiancé, would arrive for training in a few days. "It would be nice if you became friends with her," he added. Elena smiled and replied eagerly, saying she was very interested to meet the young lady who would be her eldest son's bride. After some time, the young man caught our heroine in the corridor, pressed her against the wall, and told her that even if his bride arrived, she would still remain the only one for him. Arthur frowned and angrily asked what he thought their relationship was at the moment. The boy asked if she was really asking because she didn't understand or was just pretending. Our heroine began to silently try to push him away, but Killian took hold of her hair and whispered that Jane was only a bride, and if she wanted, they could be together. Arthur looked at him and replied firmly that there could be absolutely nothing between them, telling him not to be mistaken. She then turned and quickly walked to her room. The young man thought to himself that she was very stubborn, and he liked that about her. Alone in her bedroom, Elena muttered that she was simply sick of him and would never, in her life, become the lover of such a despicable scoundrel. The next morning, the maids woke her, bathed her, and dressed her in various outfits. She thought wearily that it wasn't her who needed to be dressed up, as all attention today would be focused on her eldest son. The official wedding of Killian and Jane was set for their coming of age, 3 years from now. His fiancée, the main character of the original story, would be living in the castle from today onward to take lessons as a future wife. However, in the original story, they never end up marrying. The young man kept making excuses, claiming he needed more time to train as the heir and complete his academy diploma work, all just to gain time and enjoy himself with his mistress. Elena wondered if, by limiting her contact with him, the original plot might still be avoided. She was determined to make sure that wouldn't happen. When she approached the door, she noticed a small bouquet on the floor. She thought it might be a coincidence but suspected her eldest son had slipped it in unnoticed. Disgusted, she remembered how Lucian had spotted a daisy on her shoulder earlier, remarking that it suited her well. Our heroine attached the flowers to her hair. Downstairs, there was a commotion in the hall as everyone prepared to receive the guest. Killian yelled at his younger brother again, ordering him to stay in his room and stop looking at him with those eyes. Just as he was about to strike, Elena grabbed his hand to stop him. The young man quickly tried to justify himself, saying it was just a misunderstanding. Rel wondered what exactly could have been misunderstood here. Killian continued that he hadn't intended to hit him, only to scare him a little. The girl objected that threats can also be considered violence. She then turned to Lucian and asked if he was okay. He didn't respond but looked at her with tear-stained eyes, perhaps worried that she'd end up in trouble because of him. She reassured him that he had nothing to fear, helped him to his feet, and whispered her thanks for the flowers. Suddenly, the butler's voice was heard, announcing Mrs. Oswald's arrival. Jane, the main character, entered and greeted everyone. Killian mentally addressed Elena, saying this was just etiquette and she shouldn't misunderstand it. He kissed Jane's hand, complimenting her beauty. Elena panicked internally, thinking Jane shouldn't fall for him, knowing that he was no good. Noticing her reaction, Killian assumed she was simply jealous. Rel felt hysterical. She couldn't stop him, but they somehow needed to be separated. Gathering herself, she approached Jane, greeted her, and introduced herself. Jane responded warmly, expressing her pleasure in meeting her and hoping they would become friends. Our heroine thought Jane was charming, like an angel descended from heaven, and vowed to protect her, not letting her be hurt. Sometime later, Killian and Jane were sitting together, having tea in the garden. The young man thought he needed to avoid making Elena misunderstand if she saw them together. Jane, lost in her thoughts, apologized and asked him to repeat what he had just said. Killian repeated his question, asking if she had gotten used to life at Hyo's castle, adding that he wanted her to feel as comfortable there as she did at home. He thought to himself that, while she wasn't his type, she was quite nice. Abruptly, he placed his hand on her face, which surprised Jane, making her turn away. She thought to herself that, as his fiancée, it was strange for her to feel uncomfortable with his gestures. Now, Elena is peeking at a maid who's busy cleaning the room. Elena asks if Lady Jane is inside. The maid, surprised, answers that Lady Jane is currently with Lord Killian. Elena frowns, realizing Killian's true nature around women. She moves to another part of the mansion and spots another maid, quickly grabbing her to ask if she knows where Lady Jane is. Each maid gives the same answer. Lady Jane is still with Lord Killian. This surprises Elena. Not only is he a piece of trash, but he's also clingy. She needs to do something about it, or Jane might fall under his spell. Determined, Elena goes outside to the garden, where she sees Lady Jane and Killian having tea and sweets. Hiding in the bushes, she observes Jane's blushing face as she gazes at Killian. The sight makes Elena want to yell that Jane shouldn't fall for him, but she realizes she doesn't have a reason to interrupt them and thinks that perhaps, if she stays out of it, Killian might change for the better. Suddenly, Someone appears behind a tree. It's the little boy. He whispers, asking what Elena is doing. Elena points at Jane and Killian, gesturing that she's watching them. This makes the boy glum, and Elena notices, thinking he might have been bullied by Killian again. But the boy disagrees. Watching them, Elena wonders if maybe Killian will turn over a new leaf, so she decides to leave them be for now. After tea, Elena and Jane sit together on a sofa in an awkward silence, glancing at each other. When they both try to speak at the same time, they laugh, breaking the tension. Jane mentions that they haven't spoken since she first moved in, and Elena agrees, admitting she wanted to meet her. Jane says she heard that Elena came looking for her earlier and adds that they'll be studying under the same tutor from now on, hoping they'll get along. Elena agrees, and they shake hands, sharing a warm smile. This moment is nice for Elena, who feels grateful to spend time with the heroine of the novel. She recalls how, in the novel, Lady Jane seemed cold and emotionless. But now, Jane's bright smile and lovely voice suggest her heart hasn't been broken yet. Jane shares that she spent most of her time at the Oswald residence and doesn't have friends her age, so she's thrilled they can be friends. Elena happily agrees. As they're talking, a beautiful woman enters, introducing herself as their new tutor, Yuri. They move to a study room, where Elena and Jane listen attentively to the lesson on the Empire's history. Elena is impressed by Yuri's background as a top graduate, a vice researcher at the Imperial Research Institute, and a runner-up in a major martial arts competition. Elena is glad to have such a talented teacher. The lesson ends, but Elena wishes they had more than 3 classes a week with Yuri. As she's walking and looking outside, she hears a familiar voice and rushes around the corner, where she finds Killian up to no good. Disappointed, Elena realizes that despite her hopes, Killian is truly irredeemable, a piece of trash. Seeing her friend extremely frightened, Elena approached and angrily demanded how the gentleman could allow himself to act that way when it was clear Jane was against it. The young man, confused and speechless, simply turned and walked away. Elena couldn't believe he had just forced himself on Jane despite her clear discomfort. Had he completely gone crazy? She wondered. Jane, with tears in her eyes, whispered that Elena couldn't imagine how scared she had been. Elena hugged her, thinking of her friend, whom she had once viewed as the novel's main character. After a while, they waited together in the room for the maids to bring them warm tea and a handkerchief. Oswald then asked for forgiveness, explaining that she hadn't realized she'd started crying because Mr. Killian's assertive behavior had frightened her. Elena thought that Killian should have been more respectful towards his bride or perhaps thought he could do as he pleased. Oswald thanked her, saying everything was fine now, but Elena replied that anyone in her place would have done the same. Oswald, however, disagreed, saying that wasn't necessarily true. Elena, firmly and confidently, reminded her that if someone ever forced her to do something, she should tell them she didn't like it, even if they were engaged. If it goes beyond what is permitted, Elena insisted, you must refuse. Her friend, reassured, collected herself and promised she would try her best to do so. After some time, the Duke asked Elena if she had considered his offer to attend the academy, but she replied that she didn't want to go. Surprised, the Duke remarked that her teacher had praised her diligence in her studies and her love for reading, so he had assumed she would want to attend. Elena explained that the academy didn't offer the kind of education she wanted, as her interests lay in learning to use magical abilities. Elena had said what she wanted, but she still felt nervous about the outcome of her path. If she was truly the Elena of the novel, she thought, she was bound to have a talent for magic. She glanced at the Duke, who seemed to be thinking deeply about her request. He agreed to support her study of magic but noted that he would need to hire a wizard to tutor her. However, Elena was aware that most wizards belonged to the Tower of Magic and were not fond of non-wizards. It was notoriously difficult to get them to comply with anyone's bidding, and even the imperial family struggled to secure their cooperation. One would likely have to offer them a ridiculous amount of money to gain their favor. Knowing this, Elena acknowledged the potential expense. The Duke then got straight to the point, saying that if Elena could prove she had a talent for magic, he would support her as much as she wished. However, if she couldn't, it would be a different story. Elena understood that, beyond what she was already receiving, she couldn't expect any more support from him. The Duke seemed pleased and agreed to hire the most talented wizard he could find, though it might take a few days. With the topic of school and lessons settled, Elena wanted to bring up another matter. She wasn't sure if the Duke would be interested in what she had to say about Jane, but she held a small hope that he might listen if it concerned Lection. Given her position in the mansion as a mere freeloader, she knew she had little say in such matters. Summoning her courage, Elena reported what she had observed over the past month. It appeared that Lord Killian might be treating Lection harshly. She mentioned the wounds on Lection's body as proof, adding that the Duke could confirm this with the physician or the maids. The Duke listened in silence, then made a casual remark that it wasn't unusual for boys to play rough. He assured Elena that he appreciated her concern for Lection, but that there was no need to worry. Relieved by the Duke's final words, in which he promised to look into the matter, Elena left the room. That evening, the Duke stood by the window, gazing out at the garden. Behind him was Killian, a bead of sweat forming on his cheek as his father mentioned hearing something interesting that day, about Killian's rough treatment of his little brother, Lection. And that's all for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this short recap. If I see that you'd really like to continue this story, just let me know by leaving a comment in the comment section. I'll make a much longer recap if there's interest. Thank you, and see you in the next one.